So after a couple of months of living in Minnesota, I came to the conclusion fairly quickly that I wouldn't be a real Minnesotan unless I had a camouflage hat. So some friends of mine for my birthday got me this, and I kind of dig it. So I just wanted to let you guys know where the hat is. I still have the Brooklyn hat. It's not going anywhere. It'll pop up in videos again, but today I wanted to rock the camouflage Under Armour. Hello everyone, it's me, John Lorden. Welcome to another episode of JohnnyVlogs, and as promised on last week's Itchy Mysteries and the Itchy Mysteries a couple weeks ago about the killing season, this is my talk about that show. So if you have not seen A&E's The Killing Season, there will be some spoilers discussed here, mainly about the Gilgo Beach case, and I don't want to blow it for you, so please do yourself a favor, check out The Killing Season. They had many of the episodes available on A&E's website. I don't know if they're all still there, but you can purchase it on Amazon. That's what I wound up doing, which is great because I love watching stuff like that without commercials. It just allows me to stay focused on the actual content. I still stand by my review. I think I gave it a 9 out of 10 if I recall correctly. And with all that being said, let's get into talking about this. So here's your last warning. Spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. So, as I stated in my interview, if an outcome would have happened that I think would have affected the case relatively immediately or in a major way, I would have certainly changed my rating of that show to a 10 out of 10. But there was some things that happened in it that it's not that I found them problematic, but I'm very conscious of this kind of stuff because of the work that I'm doing now, looking into different case after different case. A big problem that I saw happen with how Joshua and Rachel went about their investigation was what I consider scope creep. And if you have worked in project management at all, you know all about this. This is when you are working on designing a solution for somebody, and all of a sudden they come back and they're like, hey, we would like these other 5 bells and whistles, and hey, could you knock out this other business problem we're having? And essentially the solution that you're engineering is no longer going to hold up to all these extra things they want done. And that happens in investigations as well. I bump into this very, very frequently. Sometimes when you're communicating with other people that are supposed experts on certain topics, they will even kind of creep the scope away from the topic at hand. And it makes it really, really tough. It's probably one of the most challenging aspects of what I do. And I think I'm pretty good at not allowing that to happen in my videos, and that's why I really focus in on something particular and try to deliver a clear message about that and then share my thoughts about whatever that message is. So the killing season, unfortunately, had a lot of information coming in. I'm sure once Joshua and Rachel, God, I keep blanking on her name for some reason. I'm sure once Joshua and Rachel put the word out that they were looking for information about sex workers that were being killed, that they just received a flood of info. And you kind of go on this ride with them in the show. Now, interestingly, when I looked into the Gilgo Beach murders myself with the person that I would consider to be the first outside brain scratch researcher, who was really just trying to pull me into that whole thing and share a lot of information with me that he had already dug up. The scope creep moved very, very quickly. There is originally the Gilgo Beach 4, then it turns that there is actually 10 bodies at that location. Are they all connected because of where they were located on the highway? It sure seems like it, but once you start digging into the details of it, we're not really certain. Some of the bodies are noted as being left with burlap. Some of the other bodies are noted as, or not noted at all, if there was burlap there or not. And then there's these other cases that are a bit further out, like a few dozen miles in each direction, where other bodies or parts of bodies are found, and those are found wrapped in plastic, which is completely different. And I remember when I was looking into this with Emre, that was one of a really tough thing for me to get around, because the MO just seemed so completely different. Putting someone in a burlap sack makes a bit of sense because the weather elements are still going to get to them. The decomposition process is still going to happen. The most that the burlap is probably going to do is, and over an extremely long time, is collect the bones. But if you put someone in a plastic bag, which we just talked about this on the Brain Scratch Searchlight case that we did last week, putting something in a bag, that's like you're preserving it. I mean, you're preserving it for possibly decades. It is not a very good method, particularly to cover up your tracks if you are killing sex workers and trying to dump their bodies. So the MO between those types of body dumps seemed very different. And that was another big part of the challenge in looking into this case. And I didn't really see Josh or Rachel kind of address this as strongly as I guess I would have liked them to. But you don't have crime scenes in this case. What you have is dump locations, and that is a minuscule amount of information. That is nowhere near as comprehensive as having the actual scene of the crime, because there are all kinds of forensics and things that are left behind at the scene of the crime. A dump location is somewhere where the likely murderer and their victim are only engaged for a matter of seconds, and particularly that's part of this whole Gilgo Beach thing. You know, someone pulls over at the side of the road. He didn't even go far off into the wilderness off the edge of the road. It was within a matter of feet that those bodies were located. It was literally pull over, open your trunk, throw them over your shoulder, take a few steps out into the brush and dump them and get back in your car and take off. So those locations are already extremely hard to find any real information. And what I was hoping for with the killing season was that all 8 episodes were really going to focus in on the Gilgo Beach thing. Now, I can appreciate what they did for a whole different reason. Essentially, they got pulled into a different case over in this state because it might be related to Gilgo Beach, and then they got pulled into another case in another state that no one is really thinking is all that related to Gilgo Beach. They kind of just went on this trip across the country looking into murders primarily of sex workers. And I think it's kind of clever that they named their show The Killing Season, because that doesn't necessarily key it only to Gilgo Beach. But for some reason, and I don't know where I got this expectation, I just thought they were really going to dive into that case. It's probably my own expectation I laid on it, because that's what I would have really wanted to do if I had resources like a full research team and, you know, a production that was working behind me. I talked about that when I covered the Shannon Gilbert case. It's just there's so much going on in those cases, and how do you process all that information? It's already difficult enough when you're talking about a set of 10 bodies, but once you allow these other conversations of these other locations that may or may not be related, if you really dedicate your resources and switch your focus away to those, I think you lose some potential at really making strong strides here. Now, outside of all that, they did some really great things. They did some things where I was like, man, I don't know if I would do that. I mean, they're getting in the car with a dude they think might be a murderer. They're going to the basement where this guy lives and talking to this guy that they think might be a murderer. And by the way, in his basement, I mean, there's just these articles everywhere of crimes. I mean, look, I research a lot of this stuff, and I was blown away by this dude that was pretty much this super fanboy of murderers and communicating with them in prison and all this. And even that, when Josh and Rachel communicated to a murderer in prison and got his insight, it was that kind of stuff was really, really clever, and I thought could certainly give them some pieces that they could chase down, and they do usually chase it down. But for me, specifically on the Gilgo Beach cases, and it's tough because not all the bodies are identified, but that is part of the challenge. I think in terms of forensic information, obviously the police have processed what they can process. They know what they can know. And there's not a whole lot, obviously, because there's not a lot of information about those victims that came out. You know, tracing the jewelry that was found on one of the bodies, Josh and Rachel didn't really dive into that one too much, and there are some interesting things that could be found about that jewelry if you look into it. But really, where is that case going to break? I believe it is talking to Of course, the family members that are related, looking at how those people are interconnected, trying to do some better searches. I don't know if like the Craigslist ads and the back page ads that they were running, if those could be looked at retroactively, like using one of these way back search or internet engines or something like that. But I do believe that somewhere in the data around all that, they might be able, especially if they could drill down to some of the original postings from these women, they might be able to see the trends of what this guy was looking for, certain keywords that are in the descriptions for these girls that might have piqued his interest, and that might help them kind of track down any newer victims that he might be going for. I really, like I said, I personally felt like I wanted them to focus on Gilgo. It felt like they got kind of pulled all over the world, and it's interesting that they tied this production so closely to web sleuths, because that is one of the things I really struggle with about web sleuths, is when I'm reading, pages and pages and pages of information about a case, and all of a sudden in the middle of that someone is like, hey, this reminds me of this other case over here, did you guys know about this? And the thread just does this total detour talking about a completely different case. The moderators are sometimes good about curbing that information and saying, hey, here's a link to that conversation that's over here. But it feels like Josh and Rachel went on a virtual representation of what it's like to investigate on web sleuths. And for being let down at wanting to see the Gilgo Beach case exposed more, I do see some benefit in terms of what they did, because quite honestly, the format that you're left with at the end of that series is something that could be ongoing. They could literally do, I don't know how many weeks it took them to produce one episode, but I believe that the Killing Season could be an ongoing show where they literally travel from state to state, not looking at just one particular crime or even type of crime, but they could expand it into looking into other types of crimes, and doing the same kind of smart things they did. One of the things I was really impressed by is they drove to the highway at Gilgo Beach in the middle of the night, and they tried to time how long it took from when they saw some headlights coming towards them until it would actually pass them. And that is really interesting information, because that lets you know, hey, could this have been anyone pulled over at the side of the road? How much time would they have to dump the body? They had plenty of time according to the test that Josh and Rachel did. And that is very insightful, because if you don't consider pieces of information like that, you're stuck thinking a few things like, well, how is this car being pulled over at the side of the road? No one's stopping to see if this person needs help, or there's no cop car driving by noticing, hey, we saw this car at the side of the road. Is it possibly a cop car that is pulled over at the side of the road, and that's why no one's stopping and they're just driving by assuming he's just conducting some business or picking up trash or moving a tire off the road or something like that? There's all these considerations that you could go down, but when they do a very real world test like that, it is really beneficial, because it opens the door up to, oh no, this really could have been anyone, because they had, a minute and a half from when they saw the headlights until when that car would actually come past them. So things like that type of detective work, I think is really valuable. I want to really see more of that. I think they had a good first season. Wasn't quite what I was expecting, but it's something else that I wasn't expecting, which I think is kind of cool. I hope they come back for season 2, maybe extend it to more episodes, and maybe they could spend a little more time in those cases that they get to and do some more of that kind of real world investigation testing. They were very good about reaching out to people, finding people to speak to about these cases. That seems to be a very strong knack of theirs that no doubt came from their working on documentaries together and searching for that type of information. So definitely a highlight for me and all that. But the Gilgo Beach case, it's frustrating. It's really frustrating to me, because it feels like the authorities at some point, almost like they don't want it solved. There's just such little information given about that out to the public that it's like they're not looking for help. And Josh and Rachel got a great piece of footage from, I believe he was a chief at a different police department, that was saying, cases do not get solved without help from the public. They don't. He said something, I think, like, it takes 95% of the time, it takes help from the public to solve these cases. And when the police aren't engaging the public or asking for their help, that's pretty frustrating to me. I mean, do they really think some dude sitting in a room staring at a computer is really going to put all that together without engaging the public, without talking to people and reaching out and doing all that? I don't know. It gets a little bit frustrating when you see case after case after case, and that is a common thread that is in all these cases. But so that is it. Killing season. I can't wait for season 2. Josh and Rachel, keep up the great work. I think they're really on to something. I believe media like that is very important nowadays, because the type of work that used to be done in journalism, with them having deep researchers and looking into things and actually exposing things that would then change what is happening in certain cases, it seems like that whole mechanism has shifted towards the documentary format, things like Making a Murderer, things like The Jinx. And I believe the Killing Season could be a good long-form version of that same mechanic. Deeper investigative journalism that could really change the world and maybe pick up for some of the slack that is now happening with mainstream journalism that is, it seems like it's much less deeply researched and much more about opinions and stuff like that. So what do you guys think? Have you checked out the Killing Season? Let me know your thoughts about it in the comments below. Thank you so much for hanging out with me on this episode of Johnny Vlogs. I hope this is a good start to your week. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you on the next show on the Lord and Arch channel.